The pressure was heavy on them, and it started to change the way they treated each other. They became closer, more protective. In total, they ended up doing 72 episodes of their show. CBS had a tight grip on what they could and couldn't do. Every single moment was reviewed, every single word analyzed. But somehow, on September 17, 1967, something unexpected slipped through. It wasn't noticed by the people who reviewed the episodes. The director didn't catch it. Even Tom and Dick Smothers themselves didn't realize it until later. During a performance by The Who, the camera caught something in the background that proved what people had only suspected before. It revealed a deeper truth that many had sensed but couldn't confirm until that exact moment. Tom and Dick's journey began with deep sadness. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., was an Army officer who served during World War II. In 1941, while stationed in the Philippines, Japan launched an invasion. Their mother, Ruth, was forced to leave the country with their 2 sons. Major Smothers wasn't so lucky. He was captured and forced to endure the brutal Bataan Death March. Later, he was sent to a hard labor camp in Japan called Fukuoka No. 22. In April 1945, just as the war was drawing to a close, he became too ill to work. He was then transferred from Fukuoka to Korea. Tragically, he didn't survive the journey. Some reports say he was buried at sea. Others believe he was cremated in Korea. Of the 110 men transported with him, only 36 made it. Major Smothers was the last to die. This tragedy left Ruth to raise Tom and Dick by herself. Tom was born in 1937 and Dick in 1938. They grew up in California, and their mother worked incredibly hard just to provide for them. Their early life was filled with difficulties, and those experiences would later shape their unique style of comedy. They found humor in pain and turned their struggles into something audiences could laugh at. Their big break happened in 1959 at a small San Francisco club called the Purple Onion. They were only supposed to perform for 2 weeks, but the audience loved them so much that their run extended to 36 weeks. People were drawn to their strange mix of folk music and funny stories. One night, a flamenco dancer who was supposed to perform got hurt. Tom and Dick filled in for her, and that night made it clear they were something special. By the end of their time at the club, they were earning $2,000 a week, a huge leap from the $2 a night they had been making just months earlier. In 1961, they released their first record, The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion. That record helped launch their career in a serious way. But before they became stars at the Purple Onion, Tom had already started a musical group in college called the Casual Quintet. He played guitar and Dick learned how to play bass just so he could be part of the group. One by one, the other members left, but Tom and Dick stayed. They began adding jokes between songs to fill up time, and soon they realized that the audience laughed harder at their jokes than they clapped for the music. Their comedy style was born from this discovery. They leaned into it. The dynamic of the innocent, confused Tom and the more serious, logical Dick became their signature. Their arguments on stage, like when Tom would shout, "Mom always liked you best," felt real, and that authenticity made people fall in love with them. By the mid-1960s, CBS saw an opportunity in them. Sunday nights were tough for the network. NBC's Bonanza was dominating the ratings. It had already destroyed 2 previous CBS shows in that time slot. CBS decided to take a risk. They wanted a show that could connect with younger viewers. Tom and Dick were different, funny, and smart. They weren't just entertainers, they had something to say. CBS thought maybe the brothers could help them win back audiences. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. At first glance, it seemed like a typical variety show. Ed Sullivan even introduced them as average American boys. But it didn't take long for viewers to realize they weren't typical at all. They started making jokes about serious topics like the Vietnam War and US politics. They used their platform to address real issues. Their comedy was clever, brave, and bold. Every week, they pushed limits. And within just 2 weeks, they beat Bonanza in the ratings. Young audiences tuned in, and advertisers were excited. Before the show launched, Tom had asked for full creative control. CBS, desperate for a hit, agreed. This decision gave Tom and Dick the power to shape the show the way they wanted. They brought in artists like Pete Seeger, who sang powerful anti-war songs. They weren't afraid to poke fun at President Lyndon Johnson right on national television. Every episode felt like a surprise. The audience never knew what to expect. The network censors constantly tried to cut things, but the brothers didn't back down. Sometimes, they even made fun of the censorship right in the show. Their writing team was full of young talent. People like Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg all started their careers writing for the Smothers Brothers. They wrote meaningful, funny, and sometimes rebellious material. These writers would go on to change American comedy forever. Their work helped create legendary shows like Saturday Night Live, All in the Family, and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. In October 1968, the show aired something groundbreaking. On October 6, they showed the Beatles' promotional film for Hey Jude. A few weeks earlier, it had aired in the UK. But this was the first time American audiences got to see something like that. At the time, these were not called music videos, they were known as promotional films. Hey Jude was filmed at Twickenham Studios on September 4. Paul McCartney had designed the set. The orchestra wore white tuxedos, and 300 people sang together at the end. Ringo Starr had just rejoined the band after a brief leave, so this moment was emotional and powerful. It wasn't just music, it was a glimpse into something deeper. Then the following week, the show aired the Beatles' video for Revolution. Showing two Beatles videos back-to-back was unheard of. No other show, not even Ed Sullivan's, had that kind of access. It changed the way people experienced music on TV. Music and television were evolving together, and the Smothers Brothers were right in the middle of it. Another powerful moment came in 1967 when Pete Seeger finally returned to television. He had been blacklisted for 17 years. He was invited to sing a song called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, which criticized President Johnson's Vietnam policy. CBS cut the song from the broadcast in September. Tom Smothers didn't stay quiet. He went to the press and told the story. People were outraged. The public demanded that the song be shown. On February 25, 1968, CBS finally aired the performance uncut. It was the first time a blacklisted performer openly challenged a sitting president on national television. That moment proved that music had the power to speak truth and break boundaries. The Smothers Brothers also opened their stage to artists that other shows wouldn't go near. Between 1967 and 1969, they featured groundbreaking bands like The Who, The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Buffalo Springfield, and Steppenwolf. These bands didn't fit the mold of traditional television. But that was the point. The Smothers Brothers welcomed them. The Who smashed their instruments and detonated explosives during their performance. The sound blew out Pete Townshend's hearing and sent debris flying. The Doors played Touch Me with a full orchestra. Jefferson Airplane sang about nuclear war. Buffalo Springfield played For What It's Worth, and Steppenwolf brought their wild energy to American living rooms. Rock stars respected what Tom and Dick were doing. On April 26, 1969, Jimi Hendrix paused during a concert at the Los Angeles Forum and dedicated his performance to the Smothers Brothers. He called them heroes for letting art and protest live together on TV. Hendrix was one of the biggest musicians in the world, and the Smothers Brothers show had just been cancelled by CBS. But Hendrix didn't forget. On stage, he reminded everyone that the show had mattered. The blend of music, humor, and rebellion was something no other show had pulled off so well. They even had fun with hidden messages. One of the best examples was a segment called Share a Little Tea with Goldie. Lee French played Goldie O'Keefe, a hippie who offered goofy advice filled with double meanings. Tea was slang for marijuana. Goldie's original name was Goldie Keefe, a word that also meant cannabis. CBS forced them to change the name, but viewers caught the joke. She talked about roaches, and everyone knew she wasn't talking about bugs. Younger fans loved it because it felt like the show was in on their jokes. But perhaps the most shocking moment came on September 17, 1967. The Who were performing My Generation on the show. Drummer Keith Moon had secretly packed his bass drum with explosives far more than anyone expected. Even his own bandmates didn't know what he had done. He wanted the performance to end with a bang, literally. When the final chord hit, the drum exploded. The blast was so powerful that it knocked Moon backward, and debris flew everywhere. A piece of a cymbal hit him, and the force messed up Pete Townshend's hair and left him with lasting hearing damage. The stage was covered in smoke. It was chaos. And somehow, it all went out on national TV. That single moment captured everything the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour stood for. It was loud, unexpected, and unforgettable. They had made a place for art, music, humor, and truth to come together in a way that had never been done before. They didn't play it safe. They didn't follow the rules. And for that reason, they became legends. The sound that erupted shocked the entire crowd into silence. For a few seconds, there was nothing but stunned quiet. Then, the screaming and cheering began. It was chaos, exactly the kind Keith Moon had intended. The Who had created a moment no one could forget, but it came at a high cost. Pete Townshend, the band's guitarist, lost almost 90% of his hearing in one ear. The explosion had caused permanent damage. The ringing in his ear never went away, and it made playing guitar much more difficult. Years later, Townshend still talked about the pain and frustration he felt. That one moment changed everything about how they performed from then on. Amid all the smoke and confusion, Townshend picked up Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and smashed it right there on stage. Tom could only stare at him, too shocked to say anything. But to the crowd, it felt like the perfect ending to a wild, rebellious performance. The Who were showing the world exactly who they were. They were loud, fearless, and breaking all the rules. That moment of destruction wasn't just noise, it was a statement. It got people talking. Young fans were thrilled. Older viewers were horrified. The performance became more than entertainment. It was a symbol of the growing divide between generations. Parents hated it, but kids saw freedom in it. That reaction was exactly what the Smothers Brothers and their guests wanted. It was unforgettable. Joan Baez was another guest on the show who stirred things up. Known for her strong beliefs in peace and justice, she had already been arrested for protesting. By 1967, her songs gave hope to people who wanted change. When she came on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, she tried to dedicate a song to her husband, David Harris. He was going to jail for 3 years because he refused to be drafted for the Vietnam War. Baez said she was proud of him. But CBS didn't let her full message go on air. They cut most of what she said, leaving only a vague introduction before she began to sing. That moment showed how nervous CBS was about upsetting the government and their sponsors. Even the president, Lyndon B. Johnson, was watching closely. He stayed up late one night, until 3 a.m., just to call CBS and tell them to control the Smothers Brothers. After that, Nixon also pressured the network. In 1968, Harry Belafonte appeared on the show and sang a song while images of police beating anti-war protesters played on screen. The footage came from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The segment was emotional and powerful. But CBS pulled the whole thing before it ever aired. They even sold the 5-minute slot to the Republican Party for campaign ads. What was meant to be a protest turned into promotion for the politicians being criticized. It was clear who CBS wanted to please. By the end of 1968, CBS was putting enormous pressure on the Smothers Brothers. Every word in their show had to be reviewed long before airing. Songs, jokes, and even full videotapes were sent to censors who picked them apart line by line. Nothing political, no talk about war, religion, or controversial topics could make it through. Even light-hearted jokes were flagged. The deadline was set 10 days before the show aired. That was hard, especially for a program that relied on being timely and edgy. The writers were constantly forced to rewrite, resubmit, and wait. It felt like a never-ending cycle. Changes were often demanded just hours before the show went live. Writers joked that it felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Eventually, the brothers decided to fight back. They created a sketch where Tom played a censor cutting up scripts with giant scissors. It was obvious what they were saying. Their creativity was being sliced apart. The sketch ended in complete silence on the screen. CBS refused to air it. Internal notes later showed that the network believed the skit made them look bad. Another sketch featuring Elaine May was also cut. Her final line was powerful: "If we're not allowed to say anything important, we're just fooling you with empty jokes." That line hurt. The censorship had gone so far that even jokes about censorship were not allowed. Tom Smothers was furious. To push back, the brothers started delivering show tapes as late as they could. Sometimes, they'd send in a safe version for review, then sneak in last-minute changes before the show aired. CBS was furious. They accused the brothers of violating their contract. Finally, in April 1969, CBS cancelled the show. The official reason was that the Smothers Brothers didn't submit the tape on time. But the truth was obvious. It was about politics and control, not deadlines. The show was one of the top 10 most watched in the country, and it had already been renewed. But CBS pulled an already completed episode, one that featured comedian David Steinberg and another anti-war message. That episode never aired in the US. It only aired in Canada. The cancellation was quick and cold. It warned every other performer, "Go too far, and you'll be shut down." The Smothers Brothers didn't stay silent. They took CBS to court, accusing them of breaking their contract. The case dragged on for 4 years. In 1973, they won. The judge awarded them over $776,000, which is more than $5.5 million today. It was a big victory for free speech on television. The judge made it clear, networks couldn't hide behind censorship to get rid of shows they didn't like. But by then, the damage was done. The Smothers Brothers had lost their platform. Later shows they tried to make never reached the same success. CBS moved on quickly. Just a few months later, they replaced the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour with a show called Hee Haw. It was simple, country-style entertainment with no politics and no risk. It ran for 23 seasons. CBS had made their choice: safe content over bold ideas. Tom Smothers took the loss hard. It damaged his confidence. Dick moved on to hobbies like racing and winemaking. Both brothers were forever changed by what happened. They tried to come back in the summer of 1970 on ABC, but the mood had shifted. The war was slowly ending, and people didn't want the same kind of rebellious humor. ABC told them to play it safe. Viewers didn't connect with the new show, and it was cancelled quickly. In January 1975, they tried again on NBC. The first episode was a huge hit, with an audience share that would be impossible today. But behind the scenes, things weren't going well. Their producer, Joe Hamilton, often clashed with them. Tom wasn't allowed to redo scenes without losing pay. They couldn't talk freely to the writers or the press. Ratings dropped. The producer left, and finally, NBC gave Tom more control. The last few episodes were more daring. They even made jokes about cocaine and brought on major guests like Ringo Starr and George Carlin. But it was too late. NBC cancelled the show halfway through the season. Even a strong comeback couldn't survive network fears. Then, in 1988, something unexpected happened. CBS invited the Smothers Brothers back for a 1-hour reunion special. They called it the 20th reunion of the Comedy Hour. It was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards. Writers like Steve Martin and Bob Einstein returned. The show was nostalgic and soft. It didn't have the fire of the original, but people liked seeing them again. Later that same year, CBS even gave them a full revival. But a writer's strike made things difficult. For a while, the brothers had to rely on old routines and guests doing the heavy lifting. When the strike ended, the show improved, earning 5 Emmy nominations. But the world of television had changed. The revival only lasted until August 1989. In 2022, the Smothers Brothers story was officially preserved. The University of California at Santa Barbara accepted their complete archive. It had everything: contracts, scripts, photos, music, and recordings. The curator said it belonged next to the Library of Congress. Their legacy was about more than comedy. It was about using humor to challenge power and speak the truth. Before Saturday Night Live, there was the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. They dared to make jokes about war, censorship, and politics at a time when most people stayed silent. Writers like Lorne Michaels, who later created SNL, learned from them. Later comedians like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Samantha Bee followed the trail they blazed. Their show launched the careers of comedy legends. Steve Martin started as a writer there. Rob Reiner and George Carlin were frequent guests. Many of them said later that they owed their start to the Smothers Brothers. The brothers had created a place where it was safe to take risks. That boldness shaped American comedy for decades. When CBS cancelled their show in 1969, it was because they weren't afraid to tell the truth. They stood up for free speech and won in court. It was the first time a comedy team had successfully fought back against a network. That case changed the rules for television. It proved that creativity matters, even when it makes people uncomfortable. During a time when America was divided by war, civil rights, and culture, the Smothers Brothers were a voice of honesty. They gave a platform to artists like The Who, Jefferson Airplane, Simon and Garfunkel, and Pete Seeger. They showed music videos like Hey Jude by the Beatles. For many viewers, this was their first look at the counterculture. Bill Maher once said that the brothers weren't trying to please everyone. They wanted to say something real. Even though their show was cancelled, that idea stayed alive. It still matters today. The Smothers Brothers proved that comedy can be brave, and that sometimes, making people uncomfortable is the only way to make a difference. Thanks for watching. Keep it and stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.